Thank you. Thank you, Greg. Thanks. In 1992, I was mountain biking in the Promised Land State Park. And with a name like that, you know something really good or really bad's about to happen. So indeed, I was thrown from my bike going 30 miles per hour and landed on my head. Fortunately, I was wearing a helmet, but the accident put me in the hospital, and the impact caused changes to my brain, which left me with intense, unrelenting, debilitating fear. I became terrified of everything. I was afraid of heights, of falling, of accidents. I was so terrified I could not sleep at night. And this went on for years. Today, we would recognize these symptoms as traumatic brain injury or post-traumatic stress disorder. But back then, those were not household words, and those diagnoses were reserved for combat veterans. But the Promised Land eventually yielded a happy ending to this story. Because fortunately, the National Institutes for Health and other government funding agencies were funding research for innovative treatments for TBI and PTSD. And I was able to gain access to these treatments over time, and miraculously the fear diminished, and I healed. And it was nothing short of a miracle. In that experience, I learned a lot about fear. The first thing I learned is to sit with my fear, because when fear comes into our body, we instantly try to get away from it, right? Well, I couldn't. And so I learned to sit with it and let it guide me to what it had to say. The second thing I learned is that fear guides us to critical information about what happened that made us afraid. And that information can then be used to process or make sense of the fear and the experience, and it's the processing of that experience that allows us to release the fear from our system. So this is essentially the essence of the protocol that I use to heal, which results in, essentially stop being afraid. Ironically, in this process, fear is being used as the guide to cure fear. Now, let me give you some context for what was happening in parallel and how fear is relevant to what I'm doing now. Not long before that accident, I had finished my PhD in electrical engineering, and I joined a company where we've spun out 21 startups in 7 years, all high-tech venture capital-backed companies, and I was a founder in 2 of those, one of which had an IPO and one that was acquired. So these were really amazing startup experiences that I was having. But I was navigating those startups with my fear from the accident, so I could really see how it was diminishing my confidence for stepping into my startup roles. So I had to work really hard to overcome that. At the same time, I began to notice that other women in my environment also seemed to be having lower confidence. I thought it was just me, because of my injury, but I started to realize something bigger than me is going on here. And in fact, the research shows that many women in tech and STEM or science-based environments tend to experience lower confidence or avoid those environments altogether, with the fear that the odds are I'm not going to be supported or succeed in this environment. And that matched really very well what I was experiencing in my career as well. So where am I today? I founded a venture firm with my partner, Sarah, and from this vantage point, we can clearly see unfavorable odds playing out for women entrepreneurs. So here's the data. Female founders receive only 2% of venture capital financing. That does not track with the volume and the rate of formation. 4 times more women are forming companies than their male colleagues. It also doesn't track with the data that shows that women are exceptional performers in the startup environment. The net result is that women's odds of raising financing are 5 times lower than their male colleagues. So this is a huge challenge, and there's many contributors to that problem. I believe that one dynamic reading on this is that women seeking financing are experiencing fear in that environment, and that's lowering their confidence, and that's reducing their odds of success. I think another dynamic is that people tend to think there must be something wrong with these women because they have lower confidence. But think about it. If you knew your odds were 5 times lower than a vast majority of your colleagues, wouldn't you feel some trepidation? A fear-based response to this harsh reality is normal. So we knew that we wanted to solve this problem right here, right now, rather than waiting for systemic change to occur. So let me ask you this. Why should you care about this? Why does this matter to you? Well, first of all, it's a huge opportunity for your startup ecosystem. There's so many women forming entrepreneurs, or so many women becoming entrepreneurs. And secondly, if you don't, this disparity will embed in your community if you don't consciously design for different outcomes. So I know that you want to be a national leader, and if you create environments that call women and all entrepreneurs in, I believe that you can become that, because people want to be where they can be seen for who they are. So it's easy to get sobered by the data, but we got really excited by this idea of what if we could crack this fear code for women? If we could, would it make a difference? Would it increase the number of women getting financed in their companies? Could it improve startup outcomes for all entrepreneurs? We believe that it could, and so we embarked on this journey to test our hypotheses, and we knew we would need to build something in order to prove that out. So we did a ton of research in all of these disciplines, thinking that surely somebody had created something that we could use, but we didn't find anything that was really relevant for the startup environment. And so that brought us back to what I know about fear and using fear as a guide for growth. And so we set out to build a method to adapt it to adapt those methods to the startup environment. As we designed our program, we knew these elements would need to be present. You cannot access your fear if you're not motivated to do so. You need to have the right kind of environment, and you need to provide a process. And so that's exactly what we created. We created a psychologically safe, wise environment for women entrepreneurs to identify and process their fears. And the intention of this method was to have women become freed up to pursue a result they previously could not attain or feared attempting. So we knew for the startup environment this had to be fast and super high impact. So we designed it in 4 3-hour sessions over 21 days, and we oriented it around something that's highly motivating to startups, producing their next big milestone or goal, and in this case, financing or something like that. This is a cohort-based process where the participants are guided to discover their fears and process through them, as well as identify solutions to ensure that they're much more likely to actually accomplish their milestone. And it's about discovering fears that would prevent you from actually achieving the milestone. So the work that we're doing is highly informed by some heavyweights in leadership and performance. Google, for example, published a study on psychological safety. They wanted to understand what ingredients are in place for the top performing teams in their organization. And to their surprise, it was not the smartest people. The teams with the highest degree of psychological safety, hands down, produced the best performance. So this is very clear evidence that the absence of fear can lead to better results. So let's take a look at an example of what might happen in this process for an entrepreneur. These are the characteristics before and after the program. So before, this entrepreneur was not being assertive, she was unclear, and she wasn't raising financing. And in the program, she realized that she had taken on these behaviors of being self-deprecating and agreeable and kind of behind the scenes, not the portrait of a startup CEO. It was a huge aha moment for her, and she had a breakthrough around that. She went on to own being the CEO of the company and closed on financing. So we've trained 38 women in 6 cohorts to date, and they give us a 94% approval rating for this program. And it's really funny because we were so excited when we were designing this program, and then we thought, oh, who's going to come to a program about fear? But they tell us that it's not as hard as they think to really address their fears, and it's well worth the breakthroughs that they experience in the process. And a majority of women leave the program with much higher confidence levels and being on track to producing the results that they want to produce. So we're at the beginning of this journey, but we're just really excited to be doing something that we think can be game-changing for women, and we intend to transform the venture capital environment by doing this kind of work. And you can make a really big difference in this right now by designing your startup ecosystem to be psychologically safe for all entrepreneurs. And I offer this mission statement to you as a starting point. Thank you.